All right, hello everybody. So I hope you guys are having a great week so far. This week we're talking about solving quadratic equations by completing the square. And what this is going to deal with is a lot as of right now is the square roots and making sure you guys understand where we're going at. So let's get started. Completing the square is a simple process, but it can be one of those things where you just have to make sure you understand the math related behind it in terms of identifying pieces. Okay, so it's kind of the same thing we've been doing before, where you're going to be taking an x squared plus bx, and then we're going to create a c value by completing the square to create a function like this. And so what this is basically meaning is we're going to create an x squared function like this, and then say it's plus 6x plus 9, and what we're doing is we're converting it into a perfect square like this. Okay, but what we're doing is first off is we don't know what this value is, so we're going to find it. Okay, so that's the very first step in this process, and what you do is you take the b value, you divide it by 2, and then you square it. Okay, so here's the first examples that we have set up here. So our b value here is 12. Okay, if you guys know standard form, remember it's ax squared plus bx plus c. All right, so we're going to take this first value here, we're going to divide it by 2. That creates 6. And then we're going to take this 6, and we are going to, sorry, my brackets were horrible on that one. Let me back that up. Then we're going to take this 6, and we are going to square the 6, and we get the number 36. And that's it. That's what we're shooting for. So our equation would actually be x squared minus 12x plus 36. That's what we're shooting for, because if I were to put this in a Punnett square and work backwards or use the x method to solve this, what I would actually come up with is a perfect trinomial just like that. Okay, that's what we're shooting for today. All right, so the next thing here is, the next one is the b value of 4. So you take 4, you divide it by 2, you would get 2, and then you square that, and my c value would be 4, right? That's the perfect part for completing the square here. And then the last piece is a negative 18. You divide that by 2, you would get negative 9. But remember, if you square a negative 9 times negative 9 would be 81. So that's it. Okay, simple process to begin. I divided by 2, squared it. You guys do the next ones. All right, hopefully you guys, as you went through this, you pause the video. That's the routine as you like you guys to have. And then you could come through and figure out your answers, right? 49 on this one. Negative 8 divided by 2 would be negative 4. Then you square that one, you would get 16. Then here would be 22 divided by 2 equals 11. You square that one, you would get, of course, 121. And that's the value that for c, because what we're trying to do is find a perfect square trinomial. Okay. All right. Now we're going to take this into factoring it out and making sure you guys can actually solve. And so what will happen is on the homework, you will get some terms like this where they want to isolate x squared plus x. Some of you, I think, or I know a lot of you in here don't actually read. And so what I mean by that is that you don't understand what we're shooting for. Well, if you read this, you have to isolate x squared and x first. Then you complete the square. Okay, so first we got to isolate the x squared. So in order to isolate it, you move the 5 to the other side. All right, then we would have x squared plus 6x, and then that equals 12 minus 5 is 7. Now, the problem is we're going to do completing the square, and so what number are we going to add right here? It's the same thing we just did. And you got to remember one thing. Whatever we add to one side, you actually have to add to the other, because there's the simple rules that we've been going over the last couple of months. Okay, so understand this. If we find the b value here, so remember it's 6 divided by 2, which would be 3, and then you square it, so my c value here would be 9. And if you have a 9 here, then that means you have to add a 9 to this side as well. All right, so now we simply just solve this out. So if you want to use the x method on the left-hand margin of your paper, you guys could do that, where you know you would have a 9 here and a 6 here. So what two numbers multiply together make 9, and when you add them make 6. That'd be 3 and 3. So you know it'd be x plus 3, and since it's the same thing, it would be squared, and this equals 9 plus this, which would be 16. And so now from there, we have our same setup that we were working on because now we're going to solve them, right? This is where completing the square kind of takes a turn. For some of you, that'll be kind of difficult, but for the rest of you, you guys will understand because it's the same thing we've been approaching before. All right, now we have this setup. Now what we're going to do is, if you guys remember, this creates a parabola that I have two different answers. So what you're going to do now is you have to get rid of it, just like we did on the last lesson, okay, where we take the square root property, which is the square roots of both sides, to solve this out. All right, so take the square root of this side here. This would be x plus 3. And then this would here would be, remember, the plus or minus. And the square root of 16 actually equals 4. So it would be plus or minus 4. And then you guys remember you split the equation. So again, it'd be x plus 3 equals 4. And then x plus 3 equals negative 4. All right, and then you would solve for x. Because our main goal is we have to complete the square first. Then we use the square root property to get rid of that square. And then you solve it out. Now this is nice and clean. So it's minus 3 on both sides. And you end up with our values of x equals 1 and x equals negative 7. And if you guys watch Mr. Parsons' videos for the homework help for lesson 9.4, the second one, he kind of gives you a tidbit on how you can of how you can actually solve these. And then what I'd want you guys to do is, if you were to solve those using his advice, I'd want to make sure that you guys can duplicate the math. Okay, there isn't a way that you can solve these problems that we're not showing you yet, that I haven't showed you, that would make it so that you can simply do one functionality. It would give you the answer, but you got to be able to do the math, because when they are not a clean answer. Okay, so this one's a clean. This next one will be clean as well, where we're going to have whole numbers as your answers. So you would subtract 20 from both sides, or 10 from both sides, right? So you'd have x squared minus 8x equals 20. And then once again, we're going to find what is the perfect square to complete it. So that way we can take the square roots of both sides. So it would be what? Negative 8. You divide that by 2, which would be 4. Negative 4. Then you would square that, and that would be 16. So if you add 16 to both sides, once again, you can use the x method to solve this. So you know, or to factor it out. And if you were to factor it out, you would get x minus 4 squared equals 36. Now use the square root property that we learned in the previous lesson. Take the square root of both sides. You have x minus 4 here equals plus or minus the square root of 36, which is 6. Right? Now you can split your equations. So it's a big key factor that you guys, because we're splitting it, remember, because of basically making sure on the parabola that you get two answers. X minus 4 equals negative 6, and then you solve accordingly, right? Make sure you guys can do the math. We're using simple linear equation setups that we had at the very beginning of the year, way back in July and August. And we're transcribing that forward, and we're using every skill that you guys have learned along the way. So if you've ever struggled with any portion of this math, this will be difficult for you. If you're fine with all this math, then you guys will succeed greatly. All right, last piece here. Add 59 to both sides. Add 59 to both sides on here. And then you'd have your setup. So this would be x squared plus 2x. And then equals, I put that equals a little too close, so let me erase that real quick. Equals, and then this would be 59 plus 4, which is 63, right? Okay, now what you'd want to do, the same thing. So you have 2 divided by 2, which is 1. If you square 1, you would actually get a 1, right? So now that you would add 1 to both sides, or actually, yeah, because you would divide it by 2. Now that you add 1 to both sides, you would actually add 1 here, and then this would be 64 on this side, and then make sure you guys have your setup from there. All right, so once you guys know that, then knowing here, you guys would be able to do your setup. Let me go down. All right, so if you guys do your Punnett square, your x method again, you guys would realize that x plus 1 squared, if you multiply those out, would be this numerator here, and it equals 64, right? Now you're going to take the square root. Okay, square root of this, square root of that, and you'd get x plus 1 equals and 64 is a perfect square again, so it'd be plus or minus 8, right? Because 8 times 8 is 64. All right, now you split it, and then you have your equations again. And I thought I'd mess this up, but this is going to be another perfect example. Whoops. And then it's going to be x plus 1, and my face is in the way. I remember that now. Equals negative 8. Solve it out by subtracting 1 from both sides, and you would get up here, I'll put x equals 7 and negative 9. So hopefully you guys understand, right? So what you're doing is you're completing the square on both sides, and then you're going from there. Now, one of the examples that's going to be on the practice is that you guys aren't going to be able to actually solve it and make it pretty. There are 2 of these in here where you're going to have to leave them as square roots. If you don't remember how we did that, look back onto yesterday's or on the last video from the last week. All right, pause the video and you try now. All right, once again, let's solve this out. So this would be x squared minus 6x. We subtracted 12 from both sides, so that's going to equal 7. And then you would want to make sure you complete the square process again, right? So this would be 6 divided by 2, and then you would, 6 divided by 2 is 3, and then you would square that to be 9. So we're going to add 9 to both sides. So once again, this one's going to be pretty. And the reason I say pretty is that it's going to be a whole answer, right? So this would be x minus 3 squared equals 16. And so you know here that 16 is a good square root number. So hopefully you guys set you up with a nice easy one. Take the square roots of both sides. You'd get x minus 3 equals 4, and it's plus or minus. You split the equations, write it out again. X minus 3 equals 4. Now, I write all this down just so you guys know the work and the math behind it. When you guys go to do the homework, the reason I do this and write this out for you guys is so that you guys can kind of see how to get the answer. If you understand this process of completing the square, you don't necessarily have to write all of this down in your notes. But instead, what you would want to do is just make sure, okay, this is how you do it. Sweet. Let me go to the homework and try it myself. I prefer you guys do that, okay? That way you guys know right now at this point that you can actually complete the work, because it's very important that you can do that. All right, this one here, same thing. Minus 3, minus 3. Now here's where it's going to get tricky, because if I notice minus 3, we're setting ourselves up here, because this is going to be negative 12x, and then it equals 5. I have a prime number. 5 is prime, so you're kind of like, uh-oh. So it'd be 12 minus 2 equals 6. 6 squared is a 36 to both sides. Right, and then once you have that, you would have x minus 6 squared here. And then what this is going to equal is, it's going to equal the square root of 41. Now, I put the square root in there already, but it would be 41 in the square, right? So, went a little fast on that one because you're taking the square root of both sides once you get to this point. Now, here's the problem we're going to run into. Is this is perfect, right? Because it's a squared, so you take the square root, but this one is not. So it's going to be plus or minus the square root of 41. And if you look at it, you have to ask yourself, can you simplify it? Can you take out a 4, what is it? It's 4, sorry, 9, 16. Can you take these out of 41? The answer is no. Okay, you cannot. It's actually, it's a prime number when it comes to this functionality. So what you do is now you split your equations. X minus 6 equals square root of 41, and then it's x minus 6 equals negative square root of 41, and then you solve, right? So you can't really solve this. So honestly, what you do is you just move the 6 over to the other side by adding it, and here is your answer. So it's square root of 41 plus 6, and then it's going to be x equals negative 41, the square root of that, plus 6 as well. That's it. That's your answer. That's where you go with. Hopefully you guys understand that aspect of it. Okay, so last piece here is you subtract 40 from both sides, subtract 40, and then you solve this out. So it's going to be x squared minus 18x, and then equals negative 36. Sorry, my board's going a little crazy here. Now, you do the same thing here. you take 18, right, and you divide it by 2, which would be 9. You square 9, you'd end up with 81 plus 81 on this side. And so your setup here is good, where it would be x minus 9 squared. And then it's going to be equals, and I'm looking at my cheat sheet for my notes, the square root of 45, right? Or 45. So let me fix that real quick. All right, it's actually 45, right? So now we take the square root of both sides. So here's where it gets a little interesting, is on this one, we can simplify 45, okay, where you have to ask yourself, can you factor anything out? Can you take out a 4, 9, which you can, right? You can take out a square root of 9. So over here, what I'd want to make sure you guys do is, most likely is make sure you split this up so you know this is square root of 9 times the square root of 45, and you can solve this to be 3 square root of 5. So that's what I'm going to be using going forward. I just want to make sure you guys understand how I got it, right? So it's this, and then it's going to be plus or minus 3 square root of 5. Always try to simplify down to the smallest terms. Always try to make sure that you can make it easier on yourself. And now what we're going to do is I'm just going to add 9 to both sides right here. And I'm going to make this a simpler equation, because sometimes in life, ladies and gentlemen, we need to go simpler. But what I want to make sure you guys still do is understand how we got this, right? So it's going to be x equals plus or minus 3 square root of 5, and then it's plus 9 at the end. Can you simplify it any further? No, you cannot. You could actually, you could technically factor out a 3, but we're not going to go that route. We're just going to leave it sitting here. Okay. So what I want to make sure you guys do is know that this is two answers, right? That it's a plus 3 square root of 5, and then a plus 9, and then it's a negative 3 times the square root of 5 plus 9 as well. That's two answers. All right, good luck. Practice on the homework, and look forward to the next video when we actually change a from a value other than 1.